My name is Mr. Autism, and right now you're going to be hearing my son in the background. He's a very cute little boy. He's practicing counting, and you're going to be hearing him throughout the rest of this podcast, so you've been warned. I just recently finished watching an anime called Dot Hack Sign. Now, without going into too much detail, Dot Hack Sign is an anime from the late 90s or early to mid 2000s, something like that. I saw it when I was a kid, but I rewatched it now as an adult, and it's an anime about a character who gets stuck in an MMORPG or massive multiplayer online role-playing game. That took a bit of brain power in order for me to get. Oh, that sound you just heard is one of my service dogs, Bailey. Well, technically, he's my wife's service dog, but Bailey is a good boy. He was trying to walk across my laptop. So anyway, Dot Hack Sign is an anime where the main character gets trapped from the real world in a digital world of an MMORPG. And the anime focuses a lot on the philosophical and existential things about online gameplay and online role-playing. And this character goes through ups and downs. This character forms strong connections with other real players. And these real players and the main character have to combat an all-knowing, omnipresent AI. Now, the ending, you would see the real-life version of the main character who somehow was able to get out of the game and into the real world, meet her love interest, who she met in the game world. But then, as you see their hands about to touch, you see digital code appear behind them, and then you cut to the scene where the AI is talking. So that's not a happy ending, but not all stories have happy endings. I was confused. I was a little disappointed. I was a little frustrated because I wanted there to be a happy ending. I like happy endings, but what can you do? Not much. Other than I have to remind myself that it's a story. And if the story made me feel strongly enough to care about the ending in this way, then it did its job. Good stories help you forget about the world for a while, and a good story can also teach you, and a good story can also get you so emotionally invested that you feel real emotions. Excuse me. So, one of the things that I do as a passion is professional wrestling. And professional wrestling is storytelling, real life physical storytelling. And regardless of how you feel about pro wrestling, you cannot deny that pro wrestling is popular. And the main way that pro wrestling makes its money is by telling stories. Hold on a sec, I'm trying to keep my son from touching my laptop. I'm gonna move it up away from him. So back to what I was saying. Pro wrestling is storytelling, and that's one of the ways it makes its money. By telling good stories that get you, the viewer, emotionally invested, you then become invested in the characters who are part of these stories. And these characters are portrayed by real people. And in some cases, the characters are the real people. What I mean by that is a lot of times pro wrestlers portray a character that they think will get your attention, or portray a character they're more comfortable portraying in public, or they portray a character that draws money. But then there are those wrestlers who just be themselves, and they do all of those things. Now, for myself, I haven't been involved with wrestling for several months, and I haven't done wrestling training for 2 years. But I will I will be restarting my training in the coming year, the beginning of this next year. And I'm looking forward to getting the physical stuff down, because one of the ways a wrestler can tell a good story is to make their actions in the ring look solid, meaning they look good and they don't look amateurish or, just amateurish, and make their offense look believable. Now, we all know wrestling is a show. Excuse me. And the goal of wrestling is not to hurt each other. The goal of wrestling is to tell the story and protect each other at the same time. And that's one of the things that you learn in wrestling school. How to make it look like you're hurting each other without actually hurting each other. And how to tell that story with a partner who 9 times out of 10 is going to be your opponent. I like storytelling. I've watched and read stories since I was a little kid, and wrestling has been one of those stories that I watched. I became a fan of wrestling during the Attitude Era. Hold on a sec. My son is trying to plug the plug in and out of the wall socket, and it's not safe because I don't want him to get shocked. Excuse me. I became a fan of wrestling during the Attitude Era. Now, the one thing that got my attention was the segment of 2 old ladies in a restaurant beating the snot out of some restaurant customers. And you see this on a restaurant camera. Those 2 old ladies were Mae Young and the Fabulous Moolah. For those who aren't familiar with pro wrestling, Mae Young and the Fabulous Moolah are Hall of Famers and very famous and pioneers for women's wrestling. Then after the segment of the restaurant fight, you see these 2 women come down the ramp to the song Taking Care of Business by Bachman Turner Overdrive. Now, I like this because I grew up on classic rock, thanks to my dad. And I was hooked immediately because I thought it was sensational that these old ladies were beating the snot out of grown men. Even though I didn't realize at the time that this was staged, it still looked cool to me. And that's what mattered. It got my attention. And I kept watching. And then I started watching WWE even more. And, excuse me about that. My son was trying to get a book out of his bookshelf. And I was trying to keep the other books from falling off. I became a fan of pro wrestling thanks to the WWE back when they had an F. And I couldn't enjoy it completely just because this was the Attitude Era and there was a lot of adult-rated content. And I was just a little kid. And even though I grew up in a conservative Christian home, I still wanted to watch it. But I had to balance watching it with my parents' values. Now, eventually I stopped watching it, but not before I became invested in some of the characters. 4 of my favorite characters during this era were Kane, who was my favorite wrestler at the time, Mankind, Rikishi, and Scotty 2 Hotty. Now, I was fans of each of these characters for different reasons. Mankind just looked weird and different, which I could relate to because I'm weird and different. And he also finished his matches by putting a sock on his hand and shoving it down someone's throat. I thought that was entertaining. I liked Rikishi because he was a big, athletic guy who rubbed his butt in people's faces. I thought that was entertaining. I liked Scotty 2 Hotty because he did the worm. And that was entertaining. I learned how to do the worm because of Scotty 2 Hotty. And then there was Kane. The reason I liked Kane is because he was a big monster who could have his way with everyone. He summoned fire, which was entertaining. And I learned later that he was the younger brother of one of the biggest stars in the WWF at the time, The Undertaker. Now, I'm the youngest of 5 boys. I always felt out of place in my family. I always felt like an outcast, and I didn't know how to healthily interact with my brothers. I have autism, and that impacts my ability to read social cues, which makes socializing and interpersonal communication difficult. On top of that, I have ADHD. So that is not a good combination for a kid who doesn't know about those things or know how to handle them. But I was able to experience escapism through the character Cain. I always wished I had a strong body, and Cain was a way for me to experience that vicariously. I enjoyed watching Cain because I wish I was him, a big monster that people were scared of. Because to me, if I couldn't be respected, I wanted people to be scared of me. Now, that has changed a lot since I grew up. But a lot of these characters had an impact on me. Now, granted, I wasn't really paying attention to a lot of the stories that were being told. I couldn't comprehend them or, more importantly, appreciate them. But I still enjoyed watching wrestling. Then, after a while, I fell out of it because I was feeling guilty about watching it, because it was, again, going against the beliefs I was raised with. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And add on top of that, being conservative and growing up in a conservative home, that impacts the way that I see things and impacts the way that I perceive things. And I fell out of love with wrestling, but then I fell back in love with it. What happened was, many years later, the Chris Benoit tragedy happened. Now, before we found out that Chris Benoit murdered his family and then killed himself, WWE had a very heartfelt segment where the superstars cut promos talking about Chris Benoit in a very heartfelt and heartwarming way. Now, the promo from John Cena is the one that stood out to me the most because it was very professional and it reminded me of watching General Conference. That's my son. Now, in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, there is a conference that happens twice a year where the leaders of the church speak to the worldwide church. The way John Cena presented himself reminded me of that, so I made that connection. And then I was watching WWE, which at that time changed to an E. What made me a fan again wasn't John Cena. John Cena opened the door for me. But what made me a fan again was Umaga. I love monsters, especially in pro wrestling. Again, when I was a little kid, Cain was my favorite wrestler, and he was a monster. As I became an older kid, a teenager, Umaga made me a fan again, and I'm grateful for that. Because as an older kid, a teenager, I started to better appreciate the stories being told. Stories like Shawn Michaels and Chris Jericho, where Chris Jericho threw Shawn Michaels' face into his TV that he used for his interview segment. And when things escalated, when Chris Jericho punched Shawn Michaels' wife in the face and gave her a bruised lip. And where it culminated with multiple matches, brutal matches, but I was hooked. And also there were other stories. One that stood out to me in particular was CM Punk versus Jeff Hardy. I was definitely a fan of CM Punk because he was different. And I thought that was entertaining. And his rivalry with Jeff Hardy, where he turned heel, just captivated me in the best way possible. Both Jeff and CM Punk did an amazing job. Now, along with watching WWE at this time, on Spike, which is now the Paramount Network, Spike TV, which is now the Paramount Network, there was another wrestling show called Impact, which was a show produced by TNA, Total Nonstop Action Wrestling. There were many different stars that I wasn't familiar with at the time, but I became fans of. One of them was Awesome Kong, a big, dangerous, powerful woman who dominated the women's division in TNA. Seeing her manhandle people like a monster was entertaining to me. I enjoyed watching Awesome Kong beat people up. Now, of course, there were other things, such as Beer Money Inc., this tag team of Bobby Roode and James Storm, who were also very entertaining. And then, at the time I was watching, there was a story called The Main Event Mafia. I mean, there was a faction called the Main Event Mafia, which was made up of guys who were main eventers in other companies who had signed to TNA, and they formed this very powerful faction. This faction was led by Kurt Angle, and one of its most distinguished members was Sting. Now, the other members were Scott Steiner, Booker T, and Kevin Nash. Each member of the Main Event Mafia not only have been in the main event of whatever company they were in, but have all been world champions. They were dominant, and they were seeking to take over TNA. And I thought it was entertaining, especially seeing them fight with the TNA originals, meaning the guys who had been with TNA since day one, many of whom had not been with other companies or even broken the mid-card of other companies like WCW or the old WWF. As you can tell, storytelling is important to me. Excuse me. And that's one of the things that got me into pro wrestling. And one of the things that keeps me a fan of pro wrestling. Now, there's one story in particular that influenced me to get into the ring as a pro wrestler. This story happened in Lucha Underground. Lucha Underground was a TV show on the El Rey network. That ran in the mid to late 2010s. I think it started in 2014 or 2015. I don't remember the exact start date, but what I remember is there was a legend of Lucha Libre called Vampiro, a Canadian who moved to Mexico and became a major star. Vampiro is best known before Lucha Underground for also appearing on WCW during the Attitude Era. And he's also known as one of the top stars in the world to never sign with the WWE. By the time he was in Lucha Underground, he had retired, had many injuries and surgeries. He was a color commentator. What happened was there was a wrestler named Pentagon Jr. I should say he's a luchador from Mexico who was going around breaking people's arms. He then tried to break the arm of a female luchador, or luchadora, but then Vampiro stepped in and stopped it. Now Pentagon Jr. was turning his attention on Vampiro and egging him on to have a fight with him. It culminated in this story the story culminated in Vampiro and Pentagon Jr. having a match at Lucha Underground's season finale, their big show called Ultima Lucha. Watching the match, I was surprised because Vampiro was obviously this older man who had great limitations, physically speaking, but he told a great story with Pentagon Jr. And I was looking at this match, and I've watched it several times, and I thought, I could do that. Vampiro's not doing that much, but he's doing his part to tell a great story. And also there was the story being told on the television, on the TV show before the match, of Pentagon Jr. aggravating Vampiro and trying to push him further and further and further into having this match. And at the same time, Pentagon Jr. on the TV show was making these sacrifices of broken arms to a mysterious master. After the match, where Vampiro was cut and bloodied and bruised, he did lose the match, but it was an entertaining match. Pentagon Jr. was also cut up and bloodied and bruised. Pentagon, after the match, took the microphone and yelled out, "Where are you, master?" And then Vampiro took the microphone and said, "Pentagon, you say you've been looking for your teacher. Well, let me tell you something. As your teacher," I didn't remember anything else after that, except Vampiro saying, "You are ready, my son." Because it was revealed that Vampiro was the mysterious master of Pentagon Jr. That was entertaining. That was a good story. And so now in the modern era, in the present day that this podcast is being recorded, I will be returning to training soon. And I'm not going to be a very athletic wrestler just because I'm in my mid-30s and I have knee and back problems. And I don't want to aggravate them even more. And I'll explain in later episodes why, other than just for health reasons. Because I have more important reasons than my own health. The art of storytelling in pro wrestling has connected with me. Great stories have connected with me. Like the ones that I just told you are just a few that I have enjoyed over the years that were entertaining to me and made a connection with me. I am grateful that I discovered pro wrestling because pro wrestling has changed my life for the better. I will explain how it changed my life for the better in a later episode, but I thank you all very much for your time in listening to this podcast, and I hope you have a beautiful day. Bye.